I just spent 3 years holding my breath, waiting for this one single moment. My father, Richard Hayes, a man who built his legacy on promises he never intended to keep, stood at the head of the antique mahogany table, the centerpiece of our historic Charleston single house. The house itself, a beautiful relic of the 1840s, was the true guest of honor at his 70th birthday celebration. 100 people, the city's elite, friends, cousins, all clinking champagne flutes and whispering about the Hayes family legacy, a legacy I'd been quietly salvaging while everyone else was busy celebrating its myth. The humid South Carolina air was thick with the scent of lilies, and the unspoken question everyone wanted answered: which of his children would finally inherit this architectural masterpiece? They all knew the unwritten rule. The house goes to the one who deserves it most, the one who sacrificed. That was supposed to be me, Serafina. I poured my 20s into keeping my mother's failing antique business afloat after she passed, giving up a full scholarship to RS, trading oil paints for balance sheets. My brother Elias, however, traded his early 20s for European gap years, a revolving door of entrepreneurial ventures that always ended with Dad covering the debt and a relentless pursuit of the next easy opportunity. He was the golden boy, charming, reckless, and entirely dependent on the scaffolding I had built around him. Dad raised his glass, the sound echoing unnaturally in the sudden silence. He began his speech, the usual platitudes about family, tradition, and the importance of stewardship. But his eyes, the entire time, were fixed only on Elias. I stood against the far wall, a meticulously crafted shadow in my emerald green dress. I was supposed to be invisible, the dependable daughter who merely managed the estate so the true heir could enjoy it. And then it happened, the moment the entire city had been waiting for. Dad finished his toast, looked Elias dead in the eye, and with a practiced, celebratory grin, he pulled a massive, ornate brass key from his pocket, the key to the house. "Happy birthday, son," he boomed, his voice overflowing with pride. "This house, this legacy, it's all yours now. You're the future of the Hayes name." Elias's face lit up, a blinding, arrogant smile that made my stomach churn. He walked toward Dad, embracing him in a show of false humility while the room erupted in applause, cheers, and congratulatory shouts. My throat went dry. My hands, which had spent years sanding antique wood and signing banknotes, felt suddenly empty. I was officially disinherited, excluded. My 3 years of sacrifice reduced to 0. My father had just handed Elias the keys to the kingdom. If you've ever had a public betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it completely rewrote your understanding of who your family is, pause right now, hit that like button, and let me know the one document they used to stab you in the back. I'm reading every single story you drop in the comments. And trust me, you need to stick around, because Elias wasn't going to hold those keys for long. I waited. I let the applause die down. I let Elias stand there, the brass key clutched in his hand like a royal scepter, basking in the adoration. Dad turned, finally noticing me with a dismissive nod. "And Serafina, thank you for organizing the party. You always do such a wonderful job." It was the ultimate insult, a pat on the head for the servant. I smiled. A slow, terrifying smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clap. I simply walked from the wall to the center of the room, cutting through the happy crowd, my footsteps silent on the 18th century Persian rug. Elias's smile faltered when he saw the fire in my eyes. I stopped directly in front of him and Dad, pulling a thick, aged, leather-bound folder from the clutch bag I'd carried all evening. The leather was scuffed, the corners worn down from months of anxious handling. I watched Dad's face drain of all color, the pride in his eyes instantly replaced by a deep, primal fear. He recognized the folder. Elias, oblivious, frowned. "What's this, Serafina? My thank you note?" I didn't answer him. I addressed Dad. My voice, though low, carried absolute authority and cut through the room's remaining chatter. "Dad," I said, holding the folder out not to him, but to Elias. "You forgot one thing, didn't you? You handed him the house keys." "I'm just handing him the documents you both forgot existed." The room went dead silent again. The only sound was the air conditioning humming and the clink of the folder as Elias reluctantly took the heavy bundle from my hand. He looked down at the embossed gold seals, the official county stamps. He looked at me, confusion turning to genuine terror. That single line, that single movement, just shattered the legacy they thought they owned. To understand the power those documents held, you have to understand the debt, the house, and the quiet, almost invisible sacrifice I made in the years between my mother's death and my father's celebratory charade. When Mom passed suddenly, the Hayes Antiques business, the source of my father's pride and the house's upkeep, was already drowning. Elias had convinced Dad to use the business as collateral for a series of incredibly risky investments, or as he called them, expansion opportunities. These weren't small, manageable loans. They were high-interest balloon mortgages tied directly to the property itself, activated on the pretense that the business would quickly double its inventory and value. It was financial suicide. Dad, blinded by his favoritism and Elias's charm, signed everything. I found the first loan document 3 years ago while reconciling the business's ledger. It was a second-position mortgage, set to balloon in 2 years, that would have wiped out the business and forced a fire sale of the house to pay the interest. The family legacy would have become a bank-owned foreclosure. I didn't tell Dad. I didn't tell Elias. They would have panicked, sold the wrong assets, and likely blamed me for not finding a buyer fast enough. I did what I always do. I fixed it quietly. I deferred my college education indefinitely. I moved into the small, humid attic apartment of the house, working 15-hour days. I became a financial ghost. I learned the world of trusts, deeds, and real estate law, the language of the quiet power that no one in my family ever bothered to master. I started selling off the lesser-known family heirlooms through private auction, pieces that no one missed, building a war chest. I negotiated with the bank, a relentless 9-month battle to restructure the debt, but the only way to save the house from immediate foreclosure was to transfer the balloon payment into a unique, high-risk, interest-only loan in my name, tied to a private trust. This was the critical moment. I saved the house by binding its fate to my own financial well-being. This was the document Elias and Dad forgot existed. They saw the house as a symbol of their name. I saw it as a toxic asset that was about to poison our lives, and I was the only antidote. They never asked about the business finances again, simply assuming that because the debt collector stopped calling, everything was fine. Elias continued his lavish lifestyle, taking credit for the business's turnaround. Dad continued to praise Elias's Midas touch, dismissing my constant work as just Serafina tidying up. Every paycheck, every single bonus I earned from successfully selling high-value, salvaged antiques went into that trust, paying down the principal that Elias had racked up. 11 months ago, I finally made the last enormous balloon payment, wiping the slate clean and paying off the original mortgage. The house was saved, but I wasn't going to just hand the keys back to the very people who almost destroyed it. Elias had to learn that the consequences of his actions were real. Dad had to learn that his favoritism had consequences far beyond wounded pride. I contacted Mr. Howard Jennings, an elderly retired estate lawyer who had been a loyal customer of the antique shop for decades. I went to his office, presented him with the full 3 years of financial records, the original second-position mortgage, and the entire history of my payments. He was appalled by their betrayal and impressed by my cold, calculated efficiency. We spent 3 weeks drafting the final document, the one Elias was now holding, the mortgage release and retrust agreement. This document confirmed that I, Serafina Hayes, was the sole party who settled the debt. But the true masterpiece was the final clause, the one that turned my vengeance into a forced, transformative intervention. As Elias stood there, sweating under the ballroom lights, I signaled across the room to a woman I'd hired for the evening. She was an official notary from the Charleston County Courthouse, and she walked over with the quiet efficiency of a hawk, positioning herself right next to the dessert table, where everyone could see her but couldn't hear our whispers. The confrontation was about to escalate from a quiet family feud into a public viral spectacle. I watched Elias finally open the folder, his eyes flying over the bold header. Final release of mortgage obligation. Below it, the numbers, the staggering amount of the balloon payment, the exact amount of money he'd spent in his entrepreneurial ventures, stared back at him. He was a second away from shouting, a second away from denying everything, but I knew I had him trapped. The debt he created was real, and the document proving who paid it was undeniable. The entire room, full of Charleston's most gossipy elite, was leaning in, waiting for the explosion. They wouldn't be disappointed. My vengeance wasn't about ownership. It was about forcing a change, a consequence, a life lesson they had never allowed him to learn. The silence that followed Elias reading the first page of the mortgage release was heavy enough to crush a diamond. His face, usually a mask of sunny confidence, crumbled into a terrified, pale imitation of a smile. He didn't shout. He whispered, "Serafina, what is this? Some kind of joke? The business is fine." "Dad!" He looked to our father, who had already covered his face with his hand, shaking his head slowly. A broken man. Dad finally understood that the debt he thought was merely managed was actually a loaded gun pointing at his legacy, and I was the only one who disarmed it. The crowd, sensing blood in the water, began to surge forward, their whispers turning into a low, buzzing murmur. "It's no joke, Elias," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "That document proves that 3 years ago, when you almost bankrupted the business with your reckless speculation, the house, this entire legacy, went into a second position foreclosure trust. I've spent every moment since then paying off your debt. The final payment, which cleared the principal and saved the house from being repossessed by the bank, was made 11 months ago, from my private trust. The full debt, your debt, is paid. The house is saved." I then pointed to the notary, who clicked her pen, ready. "But the mortgage release is only the first document in that folder, Elias. Turn the page." His hands were shaking too hard, so I gently guided his fingers to the second document. The charitable remainder re-trust agreement. This was the core of my plan, the surgical strike that turned a simple act of revenge into a life-altering ultimatum. I waited for him to read the introductory clauses. When he looked up, his eyes were wide with a desperate, panicked denial. No, you can't do this. This is..." I cut him off. "Yes, I can. When the debt was settled, the title was reconveyed to the trust I established, and as the sole settlor and current trustee, I had the legal authority to redefine the terms of ownership. Congratulations, Elias. You didn't just inherit the house, you inherited my conditions." I began reading the key terms out loud, projecting my voice so the entire room could hear the cold, legal truth that dismantled their celebratory script. Clause A. The Charleston single house is now held in a charitable remainder trust for a term of 10 years. Clause B. The house is co-owned by Serafina Hayes and Elias Hayes, with a strict co-tenancy agreement, meaning neither party can sell without the other's consent. Clause C. At the termination of the 10-year period, the house must be sold, and 90% of the proceeds will be immediately dispersed to the Serafina Hayes Arts Scholarship Fund at RISD, the very scholarship I was forced to decline to save this legacy. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Elias's eyes were darting around the room, looking for an ally, but everyone was staring at him with a mix of shock and dawning realization. The family's golden boy had almost lost the ancestral home, and the neglected daughter had just saved it, only to gift the vast majority of its future value to an art fund. "You have 2 choices, Elias," I continued, my voice calm but relentless. "Choice 1. You accept the terms of the CRT and you spend the next 10 years working alongside me to maintain this historic property, learning what true stewardship and responsibility mean. We run the antique business together, profitably, honestly, to cover the house's substantial maintenance costs. The 10% remaining equity will be our reward, a decent sum if we treat this house with respect. Choice 2. You refuse the terms, challenge the trust in court, which is your right, but I'm prepared to spend every penny I have to fight you. And in the meantime, the court will appoint a receiver to immediately force the sale to pay for the legal fees. In that scenario, the house sells for less than market value, the trust dissolves, and $0 go to anyone in this room, including the scholarship fund. You lose the house, the business, and the last shred of your father's respect. The family legacy dies today, and the fault will be demonstrably yours. The house keys you were just handed belong to a prison, Elias. Your 10-year sentence to responsibility starts now." I gestured to the notary. "Sign here, accepting the terms of co-tenancy, or refuse and lose everything." The notary silently offered him the pen. The vengeance was complete, but the true endgame, the healing, was just beginning. Elias stood frozen, the brass key feeling heavy and meaningless in one hand, the cold pen hovering over the signature line of the retrust agreement in the other. He glanced at Dad, who was now weeping silently, his 70th birthday ruined by the crushing weight of his own misjudgment. He looked at the faces in the crowd. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a horrified collective stillness. Everyone saw the golden boy brought to his knees, not by anger, but by a legal document that forced him to confront his own irresponsibility. He slowly lowered the pen. He looked at me, his eyes full of a raw, desperate hatred. But beneath the hate, I saw a flicker of the spoiled child who had finally hit a wall he couldn't charm his way through. He signed, a shaky, defeated signature that accepted the terms of his forced co-tenancy and the 10-year sentence of shared labor. The notary stamped the document, and the deal was irrevocably sealed. The charitable remainder trust was active. The house was safe, but no one truly owned it outright anymore. It was a monument to consequence. Dad stepped toward me, his voice a choked whisper. "Serafina, why? You saved it. Why not just take it for yourself? After everything." I looked at him, not with resentment, but with a quiet, clear-eyed pity. "I saved the house, Dad, but I couldn't save you from yourselves," I explained. "If I had simply taken the deed, Elias would have gone right back to being irresponsible, relying on the next safety net, and you would have continued to enable him. I chose a middle path. I protected the family's wealth, the value of the house, and I forced Elias to grow up by making the house his mandatory classroom. His choices for the next decade will either make him a responsible man or leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back." I turned and walked away, leaving the party to its stunned silence, the sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood louder than the shattered remnants of their expectations. The next morning, the house was silent. The party mess was gone. Elias, bleary-eyed and miserable, was sitting at the mahogany table with Mr. Jennings, already poring over the business ledgers. He didn't look up when I walked in. He didn't have to. The 10 years had begun. I moved out of the cramped attic apartment and took the larger, sunnier second-floor suite. I wasn't moving in with my family. I was moving into my role as the executor of their self-improvement. It was a cold, calculated move, but it wasn't born of lasting hatred. It was born of a wish for my brother to become the man Mom always thought he could be, forcing him to be the partner he refused to be otherwise. I had my freedom, the freedom from the debt and the freedom to pursue my art, because now the house was financially solvent, and the ultimate reward was dedicated to the arts. My father, Richard, spent the next few months living in a strange, subdued quietude. He stopped taking Elias's calls about opportunities. He started coming to the office, not to boss us around, but just to watch me patiently teach Elias how to read a balance sheet, how to respect a budget, how to earn trust. He saw his 2 children, the golden boy and the shadow, finally forced to work as equals. The distance he created with his favoritism was slowly being closed, not by a hug, but by a shared P&L statement. Elias resented me for a long time, but 1 year in, when a pipe burst in the basement and he didn't call Dad, but called me, asking for help, I knew the dynamic had begun to shift. The charitable remainder trust was the perfect surgical act of tough love. I got my vengeance by making him face his consequences, and I achieved a greater sense of peace by forcing him and my father onto a path of change. The house will sell in 9 years now, but the legacy it creates won't be about property. It will be about the man Elias finally becomes, and that, more than any key, is the true inheritance. If you are stuck right now, paying for other people's mistakes, remember that a carefully crafted document can be more powerful than any confrontation. My story is a tough lesson, but it's real. Before you go, hit that subscribe button to hear more stories of revenge and transformation. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of consequence. And finally, after hearing what I had to do to save my family's legacy and force my brother to change, tell me in the comments below. If you were me, would you have set the trust for 10 years, or would you have sold the house immediately?